On the banks of the Potomac River, a bold experiment took shape. A city built not by centuries of trade or conquest, but by deliberate vision. Here, where swampy lowlands once met the tide, rose the capital of a young republic, Washington, D.C. This is the history of Washington, D.C., brought to life through AI-generated visuals that reconstruct its lost eras, grand architectural dreams, fiery trials, and defining moments with striking clarity. From its founding as a neutral seat of federal power to its evolution into a global center of diplomacy and a vital stage for African American culture and the civil rights movement, Washington's story is one of remarkable resilience. Time and again, the city has faced destruction by fire, political crisis, social upheaval, economic strain, and rapid demographic change. Each time, it has rebuilt, adapted, and redefined itself. From a sparsely populated riverside district laid out on paper in the 1790s to today's monumental hub of power, Washington has endured as both the seat of American government and a living reflection of the nation's tensions and aspirations. The balance between federal authority and local life, the enduring impact of race and migration, and the constant process of reinvention. After the American Revolutionary War, the young republic needed a permanent capital that would not be dominated by any one state. In 1790, Congress passed the Residence Act, authorizing the creation of a federal district along the Potomac River. President George Washington personally selected the exact location straddling the Maryland and Virginia shores. The city would bear his name. To incorporate the important port of Alexandria, Virginia, Congress amended the Residence Act in 1791. Yet concerns about potential conflicts of interest, since Washington and his family held property near Alexandria, led to a crucial restriction. Public buildings could only be erected on the Maryland side of the Potomac. The seat of government had previously been in Philadelphia. Now the federal institutions would move to this entirely new planned city. French engineer Pierre-Charles L'Enfant was chosen by President Washington to design its layout. L'Enfant envisioned a grand, symbolic capital worthy of a rising nation. He created a grid of north-south and east-west streets, intersected by wide diagonal avenues named after the states of the Union. At the heart of the plan stood the United States Capitol, placed prominently atop Jenkins Hill. From there, Pennsylvania Avenue would run northwest to connect with the President's house. L'Enfant designed broad open circles and plazas at major intersections, intended to honor notable Americans. His most ambitious feature was a 400-foot-wide garden-lined esplanade, the precursor to today's National Mall, running east to west. He also incorporated a system of canals, including one that would traverse the center of the city and connect with the Potomac River and the eastern branch. L'Enfant presented his plan to the president in 1791. But tensions soon arose with the city commissioners overseeing construction. In 1792, he was dismissed. Surveyor Andrew Ellicott, working with the free black mathematician and astronomer Benjamin Banneker, refined the plan and continued the surveying work. The first widely circulated engraved map of the city appeared in 1792. By 1800, the federal government officially relocated to Washington. The following year, the District of Columbia Organic Act placed the entire territory under direct congressional authority and organized it into 2 counties. The city of Washington itself received a municipal government headed by a mayor appointed by the president. Construction of grand public squares and buildings had begun, but the young capital still felt raw and unfinished. The capital's early decades were marked by hardship. In August 1814, during the War of 1812, British forces launched a swift raid on the city. Over several days, they set fire to many of its most important symbols of government: the White House, the Capitol, the Treasury Building, the War Office, and the Navy Yard. The destruction was extensive, and the long bridge across the Potomac was partially burned. As the British approached, First Lady Dolly Madison directed the rescue of valuables, including the full-length portrait of George Washington by Gilbert Stuart. The portrait was removed from its frame and carried to safety, while the Library of Congress was largely destroyed by fire. In the aftermath, Congress debated abandoning the site and moving the government back to Philadelphia. A resolution to relocate was narrowly defeated. Washington would remain the capital, an early demonstration of its political resilience despite physical vulnerability. Rebuilding followed, and the rescued portrait eventually returned to the reconstructed White House. As part of L'Enfant's original vision, the Washington City Canal, an expansion of Tiber Creek, was completed and opened in late 1815. It was intended to support transport through the heart of the city, linking the eastern branch with the Potomac. Yet by the 1840s, it had become little more than a stagnant, foul-smelling open sewer. In 1846, the Virginia portion of the district, including the city of Alexandria, was retroceded back to Virginia. Residents there had grown dissatisfied with congressional oversight and lack of voting rights, an early reflection of ongoing tensions over local representation in the federal capital. The city faced profound change during the American Civil War, 1861 to 1865. As the Union capital, Washington became a major military hub, supply center, and hospital city for thousands of wounded soldiers. Its population swelled with soldiers, contractors, and freed people seeking refuge. On April 16, 1862, Congress passed the Compensated Emancipation Act, abolishing slavery in the District of Columbia 9 months before the National Emancipation Proclamation. This act marked an important early step in the city's role as a center of African American freedom and cultural development, drawing many newly freed people and strengthening the Black community that would shape Washington for generations. By 1870, the district's population had grown sharply to nearly 132,000 residents. Yet the city still lacked basic modern infrastructure. Many streets remained unpaved and sanitation was poor. Once again, some members of Congress proposed moving the capital westward. President Ulysses S. Grant firmly rejected the idea. In 1871, under the aggressive public works program led by Alexander Boss Shepard, the stagnant Washington City Canal was covered over and enclosed. The route later became Constitution Avenue. These improvements marked the beginning of a broader modernization effort in the 1870s and 1880s. During this period, German immigrant architect Adolf Klass designed and constructed more than 80 public and private buildings, including schools, museums, and government offices. The Washington Monument, a towering obelisk honoring the city's namesake and once the tallest stone structure in the world, was finally completed in 1884 after decades of intermittent construction. At the turn of the 20th century, the Macmillan Plan of 1901 to 1902, formerly the Senate Park Commission Plan, sought to realize and expand L'Enfant's original vision through the City Beautiful movement. It transformed and beautified the National Mall, added parkland, and guided the development of neoclassical monuments and museums that define the capital's monumental core today. The 20th century tested Washington in new ways. In 1922, the deadliest natural disaster in the city's history struck when the Knickerbocker storm brought nearly 18 inches of snow. The roof of the Knickerbocker Theatre collapsed during a silent film screening, killing 98 people, including a sitting US congressman, and injuring 133 others. The Great Depression of the 1930s brought another wave of growth. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal programs dramatically expanded federal agencies, drawing workers to the Capitol and spurring construction of the distinctive buildings of the Federal Triangle. World War II accelerated this expansion even further. Between 1940 and 1943 alone, the city's population surged by more than 300,000 as thousands of federal employees and defense workers arrived from across the country. Severe housing shortages followed. Long-time residents were urged to rent spare rooms. Union Station saw as many as 200,000 passengers pass through in a single day. Just across the Potomac in Arlington, the Pentagon was built at extraordinary speed, one of the largest office buildings in the world, partially opening in 1942 and fully completed in 1943 to centralize the nation's defense operations. These periods of crisis and expansion repeatedly reinforced Washington's economy as one driven primarily by the federal government, a foundation that would prove durable through future shocks. Throughout its history, Washington maintained a substantial African American population. This presence grew significantly after emancipation and helped shape the capital's cultural identity. In the early decades of the 20th century, the U Street corridor emerged as Black Broadway, a thriving hub of Black-owned businesses, theaters, jazz clubs, and intellectual life under Jim Crow restrictions. It became a vibrant city within a city, home to figures such as Duke Ellington and a center of African American culture and entrepreneurship. Federal workplaces had seen relative integration in the decades after the Civil War, but in 1913, President Woodrow Wilson, a Southern Democrat, introduced segregation into several federal departments, a reversal that persisted for decades and intensified racial divisions in the capital. Segregation in public facilities continued into the mid-20th century. It intensified briefly in 1944 under certain congressional leadership before President Harry Truman's 1948 executive order desegregated the armed forces and federal workplaces. Parks, recreation areas, and public schools followed suit in the 1950s. By 1957, Washington, D.C. had become the first major American city with a majority African American population. This shift resulted from the Great Migration, as thousands of Black Americans moved north from the South seeking opportunity, a trend that began during World War I and intensified during and after World War II. Many found jobs in the expanding federal workforce and defense industries. Meanwhile, suburbanization pulled many white residents and later some middle-class black families, out of the city core, aided by new highways and newer housing in neighboring states. The city reached a symbolic peak in the civil rights movement on August 28, 1963. Hundreds of thousands gathered on the National Mall for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. At the Lincoln Memorial, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech, elevating Washington's role as a stage for the nation's struggle for equality. Tragedy followed 4 years later. After King's assassination in Memphis on April 4, 1968, riots erupted in the U Street corridor, once the heart of Black Broadway, and spread to other predominantly black neighborhoods, including Columbia Heights. The unrest resulted in deaths, injuries, and widespread property damage. Many businesses and residents, both white and middle-class black, left the city center in the following years. Scars from the riots remained visible in some neighborhoods well into the 1990s. Yet, even amid this upheaval, the city demonstrated resilience. In 1973, Congress passed the District of Columbia Home Rule Act, granting residents a greater voice through an elected mayor and council. Walter Washington became the first elected mayor under the new system. Infrastructure improvements continued. After lengthy debates over funding and competing highway proposals, the first 4.6 miles of the Washington Metro subway system opened on March 27, 1976. New stations later became catalysts for revitalization in neighborhoods such as U Street, Columbia Heights, and Navy Yard. Cultural landmarks like the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts opened 1971, and additional museums on the National Mall enriched the city's identity as a center of arts and history. The September 11, 2001 attacks brought new vulnerabilities into sharp focus. American Airlines Flight 77 struck the Pentagon, killing 189 people. Other hijacked flights that day were apparently intended for targets in Washington. In the years that followed, the city faced additional threats. Anthrax-laced mail attacks in 2001, the Beltway sniper shootings in 2002, ricin incidents, and serial arson cases. Security measures tightened across government buildings, with barriers, screening, and surveillance becoming commonplace. Demographically, Washington has continued to evolve. Since 2000, the African American share of the population has declined as many black residents move to suburbs or return to the South in a new Great Migration, drawn by family ties, economic opportunities, and lower living costs. At the same time, the white and Hispanic populations have grown. Gentrification has transformed many neighborhoods, bringing both investment and displacement, including renewed vitality to areas once scarred by the 1968 riots. Politically, the push for full representation has persisted. A 1978 constitutional amendment for D.C. statehood failed to gain enough support, and a 2016 advisory referendum showed strong local backing for statehood, yet congressional resistance remains. In 2021, a violent assault on the U.S. Capitol by demonstrators seeking to disrupt the certification of the presidential election tested the city's institutions once more. In August 2025, citing concerns over crime, President Donald Trump shifted control of the Metropolitan Police Department to federal authority, and deployed additional law enforcement resources. Today, Washington, D.C. stands as one of the most powerful political cities on Earth. It is home to the White House, the United States Capitol, and the Supreme Court. It serves as a global center for diplomacy, policymaking, and international relations. Its economy remains anchored in government service, yet its streets and neighborhoods reflect layers of cultural change, migration, and adaptation.